Well, hello everybody. Long time no see. Welcome back. This is Aaron, and this is a special recruiting episode of the Outrageous Podcast. With the incredibly tough season we had last year, this is a chance to look ahead to brighter times. So, glad you could join me. Okay, coming up here shortly, I'll be interviewing Zach Abolverdi of the Gainesville Sun, our resident recruiting guru. I was fortunate enough to interview him earlier in the season. But that was several months ago, and there's been a lot of things happening since. So he'll be able to fill us in on the latest on signing day coming up here this week. So last time you heard from me was Thanksgiving weekend after that embarrassing game against the Seminoles, who of course went on to make our nightmare of a season complete by winning the national title. I remember telling someone that now we live in a world where Jimbo Fisher has won a national title. That's a really scary thought. Anyway, I remember being really upset that day, more upset than I was expecting, because I felt the coaches had just kind of run the clock out on the season and didn't even really give the Gators a chance to win. And I thought the fans and the players deserve more than that. So, the whole topic, the entire second half of last season is, will this coaching staff be retained? Will Muschamp be fired? And I certainly made it no secret that I felt that after what transpired last year, I couldn't see how any coach at Florida could keep their job. Ron Zook had been fired for much less. And I thought that swapping out a bunch of assistants was going to be like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. If you feel the problem's at the top, anything else you do isn't going to matter in the long run. Well, obviously that's not what Jeremy Foley decided to do. For reasons that only he knows. Some think it's money, some think he's just enamored with Muschamp. But whatever it is, Muschamp is still our coach. And I'll just stay honest and say that I'm pessimistic about it. I don't enjoy being pessimistic about it. I don't like it. But I'm at the point where it's going to be, show me, Gators. I'm not listening to words anymore. I'm not listening to coach speak anymore. Will Muschamp's got a long way to get this fan base back. He knows it. And the way he's going to do it is on the field. So I'm in a holding pattern for the summer, and we'll see how our Gators come out next year. Now, I know I'm not the only one. I'm a guy that kind of prides myself of having my finger on the pulse of the Gator Nation. I can tell you there's a lot of pessimism out there. There's a lot of people that are still upset out there. They don't even want to talk about the Gators right now. And we all know how to fix that problem. We got to, not only win some ball games, but I think it'd be nice to be watchable. To me, that's the word I'm thinking of for next year. The expectations for next year aren't real high. Not a lot of people are predicting titles for the Gators next year, but as long as we're watchable, to me, that's a big advance. I'll take that. So, saying that, let me switch over to something a little more optimistic, and that's this recruiting class. Part of the pessimism after a 4-8 season is assuming that the recruiting class is really going to stink, especially when you have a coach that's on the hot seat. You ask yourself, boy, do these kids really want to come into an unstable situation, especially when our biggest rival is the one winning the titles. But I'll tell you what, I think it's obvious that this coaching staff really worked hard this recruiting season, and it shows. I know they managed to flip some guys in January unexpectedly, and they're not done yet. We've got a top 10 class with a decent shot at a top 5 class. And I think after the season we had, that's something to really be excited about. And here to talk to me about it is Zach Abolverdi of the Gainesville Sun, who really knows a lot more details than I do, which is why I have him on the show. The man eats, drinks, and sleeps recruiting. And I'm really happy to have him back on. Zach, great to have you, man.
Thank you for having me, man. I really appreciate you reaching out to me and letting me speak to all your listeners out there.
Zach, last time we spoke was way back in late October, and I know there's been a lot of changes since then, some good, some bad. Can you fill us in on some of those in the last couple of months?
Definitely. Obviously the changes since the last time that we talked are definitely the 2 recruits from South Florida, 3 actually, Alvin Cook first decommitting and deciding to go to Florida State, Ermon Lane following him up a few weeks later, and then Chris Lammons, the cornerback out of Plantation. Those were some defections that I tell you what, man. I think if Florida went undefeated in 2013 and won a national championship, I still think that you would have seen some drama in the recruitment of those 3. Just for whatever reason, it seemed like when they committed, you always got the sense like Florida's going to have to fight, for these guys all the way until the end. And sure enough, once recruiting started heating up, that happened. They began wavering. Obviously, the season that Florida had a lot to do with it. But like I said, I think if they still would have had a great year, you would have seen this from them. It's just really typical with the majority of South Florida kids. I don't think they're, you can't categorize all of them. But I think you see this a lot. And you knew Dalvin was going to be hard for Florida to hold on to. And, once it got there towards the end, it was, there was so much lies and misinformation and stuff like that it was really hard to, figure out what he was going to do. And make no mistake, I mean, it was a loss for Florida, but they rebounded, I think, really well with the addition of Brandon Powell, during the week of early enrollment. At the end of the day, they needed a guy that could be a change of pace player, and someone that could bring a different element to the offense that wasn't in the mold of a Kelvin Taylor, of a Matt Jones, of a Mac Brown. They needed a guy that could take it and take go to the house, if he got a seam. So they got that in Brandon Powell. I obviously don't think he's as good as Calvin Cook. That's Mr. Football in the state of Florida this year, but he's a good player. I think getting him in early and being able to go to spring practice is really going to help Kurt Roper as he tries to kind of mold Florida's offense into his scheme. Herman Lane, obviously, losing him, you never want to lose a top flight wide receiver. Florida did sign 5 last year. I personally don't feel like it was a huge priority, but when you got a guy like that committed, you obviously want to keep on to him, and you can never have enough players like that. But I don't think it by any means cripbles Florida's class. For one, they've added another receiver in his place, and Ryan Sosa, and it looks like they're going to get C.J. Warden, who's also a Florida State commit. So, but really, I still look back to the 2013 class. Some of those guys that they signed, Amon Fullwood showed a lot of promise at the end of the year. And, DeMarcus Robinson, he's having his off-the-field issues. If he can ever get that figured out, he's a special talent. I mean, out of him, Fullwood, and even Herman Lane, from just a pure talent standpoint, when you line those 3 up on the field, and I've seen all of them in person, if you were to watch them run the route tree and go through routes, you'd look at DeMarcus Robinson and say that's the best receiver out of all of them. Now, obviously, there's a bunch of other factors that go into whether or not he's going to be a good college player and pan out, but they have talent there, and Alvin Bailey's another guy that Florida fans didn't even get to see, as he redshirted. There was really no need or place for him with the, production that Solomon Patton had at the slot, but he's a guy that can play there, and I think that he'll do well. And then ending with the last change was Chris Lamons. That was really a byproduct of Florida getting Jalen Tabor. And Chris Lamons is a nice player. He probably could have came here and done good things. He really reminded me a lot of like a Cody Riggs. But at the end of the day, Jalen Tabor was the top quarterback on Florida's board. He was the best cornerback that I saw at the Under Armour practices, and so did most of the other people that were there and watched. And if you had to, if getting him cost you Chris Lamons, I think the Florida coaching staff will live with that. But he is a special player. I expect him to start at some point next year opposite Vernon Hargraves, and that is really going to be a dynamic duo that Florida has at the corner spot. But they've really rebounded well, in my opinion, since those 3 losses.
Zach, what do we have right now? 21? Is that the count right at the moment?
Yeah, they have 21 commits right now. There's currently 25 scholarships. There's really 26. There is a transfer that's out there. I guess I've talked about it before with Cody Riggs. We're just kind of waiting on Florida to come out and officially say it, but all indications are that he is no longer with the program. So I think Florida will be able to sign 26. I expect them to pretty much reach that number. They might miss on a few guys here late, but they have 21 commitments, and they can add up to 5 more unless there's any additional transfers that we don't know about, which there could be.
As of right now, there's been a lot of debate. I think a lot of people are pretty happy with the class overall, but do you feel that Florida has met its needs? That's been a big debate. Did we get the guys we really needed?
Yeah, well, like I was talking about earlier about Herman Lane and Dalvin Cook, I'm going to have a Wednesday advance for signing day that'll be up on Gatorsports.com, and I encourage all Gator fans to read that story and listen to some of the comments from Tom Luganville. ESPN's national recruiting director who I spoke with this morning about Florida's class. When you look at their class, they don't have, for 2014, they don't have any linebacker commits, they don't have any safeties, they only have one receiver, and they only have one running back. But you look at their 2013 class, they signed 4 linebackers, and 3 of them were All-Americans that weren't named Jared Davis. I mean, Jared Davis ended up being the best, at least last year, out of those 3. Then you got 3 others who were All-American guys. And, for injuries and stuff like that, didn't see the field. They signed 3 safeties, and some good ones, too. They signed 5 receivers. They signed 2 running backs. One, it's funny, once all that, drama, I guess, started going around with Dalvin Cook, fans, at least recruiting fans, I won't say all fans, I think there's a good portion of Florida fans that probably don't even pay attention to recruiting, but it seemed like Dalvin Cook became such a big priority, and don't get me wrong, they need that change of pace player, especially with the new offense that they're having, but guys, at the end of the day, they have Kelvin Taylor. He was a all-SEC freshman and is a really good player, and also Adam Lane, who, people might not remember, but I remember coming out of training camp, a lot of defensive players for Florida that were saying he was the hardest running back to tackle. And obviously he didn't get a shot because Florida is so deep at the running back position. But that just makes my point that a guy like him, didn't see the field, shows, where they're at running back. I don't think running back was a priority. I don't think receiver was a priority, nor was linebacker or safety. If they could have added a great player like Dalvin Cook or Herman Lane or Jamal Adams at safety or Raekwon McMillan at linebacker, all guys that they went after, of course you want to put players like that on your roster. But when I look at their class, the number one thing to me was corner. They had to get cornerbacks because they lost their top 3, and now really, with Cody Riggs leaving, that makes it even more of a need. They needed a top flight quarterback. They needed tight ends because their tight end position has just disappeared, really since Jordan Reed left. And you always need offensive linemen and defensive linemen, especially with, Dominique Easley leaving this year and possibility of Dante Fowler and John Bullard going to the draft next year as juniors. So those were what they needed. They got Will Greer quarterback. They got 3 tight ends committed. They got 5 offensive linemen, and they're in the running for 3 more that are going to announce on signing day. They got 2 All-American defensive tackles. They had 3 defensive ends, but really Gerald Willis, I mean, that guy is a special player. I'm still surprised that Florida was able to get that kid from Louisiana. He was one of the guys that I predicted wrong this year. I really thought that he was going to go to LSU. And then you look at what they did at corner with the guys I talked about. Tabor, Duke Dawson is another early enrollee. Quincy Wilson, and then Dory Jackson is a guy that they're going after that could play, corner and receiver. And then J.C. Jackson, who, all indications look like he's going to stick with Florida, and he also can play corner receiver. So when I look at their class, I see a class that has its needs met, and I know when people watch Florida's offense, a lot of folks want to point to the receiver position or the running back position, but when I watched Florida's offense last year, I didn't look at the product that they put on the field and say, man, they need better receivers, or man, they need better running backs. What I saw was they didn't have a quarterback, they didn't have an offensive line that could block, and their tight ends were nowhere to be found. And that's what they had to address this year, and I feel like they did a good job of doing that. And then what they did on the defensive side of the ball with Thomas Hawley and Gerald Willis and Jalen Tabor, flipping those guys in the month of January, it was just unbelievable. You could have never told me that Florida was going to do that after the year that they had, and after it kind of seemed like there was the potential for the class to fall apart. And really, at the end of the day, they lost 3 guys from it. And like I talked about at the beginning of the podcast, 3 guys that were probably going to give Florida fans, coaches headaches, regardless of what happened with this year with Florida's football season. So the fact that they were able to hold on to the majority of their class and also close with some of the guys that they've gotten in January has been really impressive. I still think that they have some guys that they need to add on signing day. As much as receiver is not a priority in my eyes, I still feel like they need to at least get 2, which I expect them to. I think they need to get another offensive lineman, even though they have 5 in the class, which I think they will, and a defensive end if they could get it. I don't expect them to get Lorenzo Carter. Dory Jackson, who knows? I really, I can't sit here and say confidently that he's going to go to Florida anymore after those visits that he took. I know some people feel like, maybe he did it to create suspense, and if he went there, now everyone thinks he's going to go to one of those West Coast schools, and then he rolls out on signing day and picks Florida. But I'll believe it when I see it. He's just been to USC too many times for me to feel now that he's not going to go there. But again, I think that this has been a really good class for Florida, and better than I expected them to have after going 4-8. To be quite honest.
Now, Zach, you talked about the guys that flipped in January unexpectedly. Do you have any idea? Do you have any indication why they flipped? Because I know a lot of us were really curious about that. What was it they saw in Florida?
Well, you look at Brandon Powell and DeAndre Porter. Those are two in-state guys that Florida was really their dream school, and for one reason or the other, the Gators just did not go after them early in the process. But once they saw a need for them, and they also had the room for them, you saw how quickly a Florida offer changed their mind. I mean, Brandon Powell switching from UM to UF during the week of early enrollment, and then DeAndre Porter, he gets the offer from Florida. He commits from USF and comes and visits Gainesville, and then that next Monday he's a Gator. So those two weren't, I don't want to say surprising, but you could understand why, or how should I say, Florida was able to flip them. Some of the other ones were a little bit more head scratchers. Thomas Holly, it's pretty obvious why he chose to go to Florida, and then leave Penn State, and that was because of the coaching change. I still just didn't feel like Florida would be able to get this kid to leave the Northeast. Once Urban Meyer hired Larry Johnson, who was going to be his position coach at Penn State, and he went with the Buckeyes. That was a school that had been a finalist for Holly, and then he took an official visit there. I think I kind of just assumed that he was going to go to Ohio State, but like his coach told me, when he narrowed it down to Penn State and Florida, he really narrowed it down, and those were the only two schools that he was going to go to. And really, when the coaching staff from Penn State left, it was a no-brainer for him that he was going to go to Florida. He wasn't going to build a relationship with James Franklin and his staff that he had with Will Muschamp and his, in a 2-3 week span. So that, I didn't expect that one to happen just because he was a kid from New York, but I can, looking after speaking with his coach and seeing what he said, about how Thomas approached his recruitment and dealt with it, makes sense why he chose UF. Jalen Tabor is still the one that amazes me, because when he showed up at Under Armour, he did a video interview with Mike Farrell, and Mike Farrell had asked him why he had eliminated Florida, who at one time was his leader, and he said when he took an official visit to UF, he just didn't feel right. He didn't feel like there was stability on the coaching staff. He felt like the year that Florida had, I think the words he said were unacceptable for the Gator Nation to have a 4-8 season. Really made some harsh comments about Florida, to be honest with you. And so to see him go from that to, deciding the day or two before he was going to enroll early, after he had made a commitment to Arizona that I'm going to go to Florida, was shocking, to say the least. But I think once, he made that commitment to the Wildcats, and then 2 days later, Marcus Robertson entered the NFL draft, I think that played a big part in it. It might have been the reason why he changed his mind. But I think Florida was always his first love. Like I said, they were his favorite early on. The kid can go on national TV or really anywhere and make his commitment. But once, it starts getting closer to, putting the pen to paper, and you're going to go all the way across the country. He's from D.C. To go from D.C. all the way to Arizona is quite a trek. And I think once he started considering the distance factor, and then Marcus Robertson leaving early, that really that was what led him to UF. But while it all makes sense now that it's hindsight, at the time you couldn't have convinced me that Florida was going to be able to pull that off. And even though we can find reasons for it now, it's still impressive, nonetheless.
Zach, did the hiring of Roper have any impact on our current class, or do you think it will have any impact on the hopefully up to 5 players we might still sign here?
Well, I expect Florida to flip Treon Harris, the quarterback from Miami Booker T. Washington, who's currently quote-unquote committed to Florida State. I don't know what you want to call that. I mean, he's making the final decision on signing days. That's not really something a committed recruit should be doing, but it is what it is nowadays. You know, it's kind of almost become the norm. But, you know, I think that's the guy that, had it not been for Kurt Roper and the offense that he was bringing to the table and convincing Treon that he could fit into the scheme that he was bringing to Gainesville and what he likes to do with his quarterback, that's the guy that Florida just would have not had any shot with. They really didn't have any interest in him as a quarterback with the old system that they had under Brent Pease, and I don't think that he had any interest in Florida either because, you know, he saw what they did on the field with their offense. So the coaching change and the change in philosophy really kind of created that opportunity for Florida to come in, and I do expect them to get Treon on signing day. And you know, I asked his dad, who is also his head coach at Miami Booker T, you know, why would a kid go from a situation where he's committed to a school that just won the national championship, where he can come in and play 1 year behind the Heisman Trophy winner and then take over, as opposed to coming to a school like Florida, who had the worst season in school history in 30 years, is having a change on offense. There's a lot more competition at the quarterback, and there's also uncertainty. I mean, not going to be playing behind a guy like Jameis Winston. But really, I mean, I asked his dad, you know, what would make him want to leave that situation to come to Florida? And his answer was, you know, the relationship that he had forged with Kurt Roper and how he felt that they made him a priority and how much he was attracted to that, and that he felt that he could come and have success at UF. He did grow up a Gator fan, which a lot of people don't know, but again, when you talk about a guy that Kurt Roper made an impact for, I think he's definitely one. I think Brandon Powell is another guy that you see some effects of Kurt Roper, but like I said, they always wanted to change of pace back in this class. And then Isaiah McKenzie is a guy that I don't expect him to land on signing day, but he's a 5'8", 175-pound receiver who's really the perfect mold of someone that plays in the slot position, and he's a guy that would have Florida really would have never went after had they not gone to this new system and Kurt Roper came. So you're seeing a little bit of it, and I think as the recruiting classes continue to go on, you get into these next couple of years, you're going to see even more of his influence.
I know you've already touched on 2 or 3 guys, but is there any real surprises you think are going to happen signing day? Anybody under the radar that maybe people aren't expecting?
There's a lot of smoke out there about Derek Kelly, in-state offensive lineman, who it looked like he'd been leaning to LSU for a while, but there's some rumblings that he might choose to stay close to home and go to Florida. I think that would be a surprise. I mean, I'm going to predict him to LSU, but not really that I can name. I mean, if they get anybody else, it truly will be a surprise. But I wouldn't put it past Will Muschamp and his staff. They might have something up their sleeve that nobody knows about, or they might. I think if they landed Lorenzo Carter, that would be a surprise. I mean, obviously everyone knows who he is, but if they were somehow able to beat out Georgia for him, that would definitely probably be the biggest shock to me of any recruit that they got in this class. But again, I think if they get one more receiver and they get one more offensive lineman and they can add a defensive end, if they address those 3 positions, I think, no matter who they are, I think that it'll be a good day for the Gators. But the bulk of their class and the needs of their class have already been addressed and met. And I know there's so much excitement that gets generated by signing day, but really the kids that commit on the first Wednesday in February, they don't mean any more than the kids that commit in June or August, or December. I mean, at the end of the day, they're all the same players and recruits, and they mean just as much to their position as the guys that pop on signing day. And I think that's important for everyone to remember, although it kind of gets lost with all the hoopla that is National Signing Day.
Yeah, and I show Florida ranked 7th right now among recruiting classes, and it sounds like they might even be able to push themselves into the top 5, which, after a 4-8 season, I think people are thrilled with. I think the coaching staff has really worked hard on this one.
Yeah, they have, and I'm a guy that doesn't put a lot of stock into the recruiting rankings. I mean, I make sure that I mention them in all my stories, and put that out there, because I know there are people that like to judge recruiting based off that. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it is very good indicators in a lot of cases of how good a class could be, but at the end of the day, you got to look at the roster. You got to look who they've signed in previous classes. You got to look who's going to be leaving after the next season, and you go after the needs, and that's what I look at the most. And when I look at Florida's last class, and I look at who's going to be leaving next season, again, just to repeat, I really feel like it was quarterback, it was tight ends, and offensive linemen and defensive linemen, and those are the areas that they really hit. And in pretty much almost every spot, they were able to land the top guy that they targeted when they sat down after the spring evaluation period, and they said, "Here's our board at this position, and these are the top 5 guys that we want." When they sat down and after the spring and made that list and made their top targets, they landed pretty much every guy that they had at the top of their list at those positions of priority. So that to me is impressive. That's more impressive than any recruiting ranking that you could put on the class as a whole, or an individual player, that they were able to get the guys that they set out that they wanted the most, and they were able to do it in a year, where they just had the season that they did. That to me is more impressive than anything, and that's important to keep in mind.
Zach, it was really great having you on the show again, and I'm looking forward to doing it next season. Thanks a lot.
All right, man. Thanks, buddy.
Well, what a great interview, and what an optimistic interview, especially after all my pessimism at the beginning of the podcast. Zach has certainly given us his opinion that this coaching staff really hit their targets. So if I'm going to rip on the coaches when I think they do something wrong, I'm going to give them credit where I think credit's due, and I think they deserve some credit for this recruiting class. And let's hope we close strong on Wednesday and get at least 4 or 5 more. And by the way, if any of you are interested in following Zach on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, it's Zach, Z-A-C-H, Abolverdi, A-B-O-L-V-E-R-D-I. And he's a great guy to follow if you're really looking for some insider information on Florida football. So that's going to do it for this very special recruiting episode of the Oxrageous Podcast. It was fun to get back in the saddle after a few months off. Not sure what the spring and summer schedule is going to be, but I'd like to be back and do a few things. As always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening, and if you need to reach me for any reasons, questions, comments, you can get me at oxrageous@oxrageous.com. Thanks again. Have a great week, and go Gators.